A Fisherman's Tale, Chapter 1, The Bait. The Zangor's eyes shifted around frantically, filled with both fear and spite. It was lying on its back, pushing itself away from Zarna with the palm of its hands dragging its limp and mangled leg across the pale dirt. Its whimpering was shrill and pitiful, pleading, as Zarna brought her handgun against it. Her mind swam in a tired haze. She pulled the trigger. The gun roared forth a smoke and fire, and the Zangor spasmed sharply before sagging lifelessly to the ground. The blood trickled through the dirt in a shape like red antlers. "We've driven the beasts back! Another great victory for the glory of Azir!" Argas proclaimed. His voice sounded stiff and academic, but noble. Zarna, however, could barely stand. It was the third such victory in as many days, and it was a vain victory. They had slain only a handful of Zangor and lost many of their own in return. Argas Stormhailer and his retinue of sequitors were indefatigable, true. They were Stormcast Eternals, demigod warriors reforged by a god, but Zarna and her company of handgunners were but human, and were all but spent. "By your grace and wisdom, Knight Incantor," Zarna said to Argas, her voice dry with exhaustion, "we've been marching and fighting for 3 days now. If we can't make camp soon, my men will fall over. I will fall over. We need to rest." "Is it so?" Argas said smugly, but Zarna did not answer. "Very well then, Captain," Argas continued. "If we truly must, we shall make camp at Hatter's Basin." "Thank you," Zarna mumbled as she shuffled back to her unit. Her legs were burning, but at least that was the prospect of sleep on a cot instead of a bedroll atop the rocky gurish dirt. The camp was set up in the shade with 3 massive conifers. Zarna couldn't remember ever seeing them before here. Their crooked forms reminded her of haunched guardians, sunken deep into contemplation. And perhaps they were. There were stranger tales in the mortal realms. At least they could gather some of the dead branches for firewood, and the shade was pleasant. "Zoggin pricks," Arid said to Zarna. "Why is it that we, the simple folks, have to haul firewood, while Sigmar's finest stand around picking their noses, eh? I'm exhausted." "Calm down, soldier," Zarna replied. "We're all tired. When the Zangors come at us in full force, they'll keep us from harm. You'll be glad they're here." "Oh, with due respect, Captain, but will they?" "Keep us from harm, I mean. I haven't seen a single one of them in their bloody hammers yet. Arn is dead, as is Samo, and Keurig too. And yet, not a scratch on these Stormcasts," said Arid. "We're free guilders, Arid. Death is part of the job. You know this. Besides, maybe the Zangor are scared of the Stormcasts? Perhaps we just make a much juicier target," Zarna said, although she didn't quite believe herself either. "Sure, juicy, whatever," Arid replied bitterly. "Something's wrong here, Captain. Very, very wrong here." He stared intently at her, but Zarna dismissed the warning and took her bundle of firewood back towards the fire pit. Arid was right, though. There was something off. The Sequitors hadn't fought the Zangor at all, and neither had Argas. Argas had been barking orders, sure, but he didn't fight either. And like any Knight Incantor, he was a talented wizard, but he hadn't cast a single spell. Perhaps he was saving himself for the real battle? She had been on patrol with him before, and he had been acting much different, less callous, and definitely less smug. Perhaps it was the reforging. The rumors said that every time a Stormcast died and was returned to life, they changed a little, or rather, lost a little. Chapter 2, The Hook. Night fell as Ulgu crept across the light of Hish, when a voice called out from outside the camp. Zarna rushed to a makeshift barricade to assess the newcomer, but Argas had already beaten her to it. "What do you require, stranger?" Argas sneered through his face mask. "Just a hunter who wishes to warm herself by your fire," the newcomer called back. She sounded distinctly native, definitely from this region. "Come inside," Zarna called back. Despite the faceplate, Zarna could feel the intense disapproval in Argas's glare. The glowering mask seemed to look even more angry than usual, and perhaps it did. "You would invite a spy into our midst?" he spat, clearly intending the newcomer to hear him. What is there to spy on? We're a patrol. Besides, you could learn much from her, Zarna replied. Like perhaps the local customs of hospitality, she added. Very well then. She can stay. We shall interrogate her shortly, Argus replied to Zarna's surprise, before he marched off. The newcomer was an elf. Her pale yellow cloak blended in well with the dirt of Hatter's Basin. Zarna studied her intently. Argus wasn't completely wrong in wanting to shun her. Perhaps the elf did intend harm in one form or another. An elf? You with the Wanderer clans, then? Asked Arid, who sat at the campfire watching the newcomer approach. Aren't we all wanderers? The newcomer asked back as she graciously sat down beside him. Yeah, I guess so, Arid replied, immediately disinterested by the merest whiff of philosophy as he continued idly to prod the fire. Are there many of your people here? Zarna asked when she too sat down. Yes, but we are all well hidden, the elf replied. She smiled. Although elves don't age like humans, Zarna could tell she was very old, like extremely old. Zarna returned the smile, but didn't continue her inquiry. It was fine, she was tired. We are warriors from Azir, sent to liberate these lands from chaos, Argus proclaimed, authoritatively as he barged graciously and unannounced into the conversation. What can you tell us about the Zangor in these lands so that we might smite them in the name of Sigmar? Nearly all the sequitors had gathered around behind Argus, their face ominously hidden behind their golden masks. That's very kind of you, the elf replied, before turning her eyes to the fire. But I fear we have no need for warriors. What do you mean? Asked Argus. To slay the Zangor, we need hunters, not warriors, the elf replied. I zoggin' hate riddles, Aaron stood up and walked away, clearly too tired to deal with any of this. A shot cracked through the night. The Zangor were probably probing the camp. It was to be expected. Argus, however, seemed intrigued solely by the elf, although his faceplate betrayed no emotion. He went to sit down on a squarish rock, straight across the fire, and stared at the elf. The trees around them seemed all the more ominous, glowing in the orange firelight. The branches looked like blood-red antlers. Continue, he said calmly. This is Gur, realm of beasts, the elf continued dreamily, seemingly unfazed. You can't fight beasts, you must hunt them. Imagine that one would fight a fish. Would one march towards it, rattling drums, beating shields? The fish would simply swim away, and one could proclaim their hungry victory. So, Zarna asked, confused. The warbling shrieks of the Zangor, the distance, made her all the more uncomfortable. To catch a fish, you bait and hook it, replied the elf. We are not hunting fish, Argus said. Neither are you hunting Zangor, Argus, the elf replied, fixing her gaze upon the stormcast. Zarna frowned in disbelief. How'd she know his name? Had she been following them? Argus's strange demeanor suddenly seemed a bit more reasonable. Arid came running towards them. Captain! Zangor! Arid shouted. At least 5 dozen of them. We're surrounded. They must have crept. Argus raised a hand, silencing Arid, still transfixed upon the elf. Around them, the well-drilled handgunners made ready for battle. The sequitors, however, loomed ever more threatening over the elf, who, like the eye of a storm, remained disturbingly calm. And who are you hunting in this realm, then, elf? Argus continued. Is it just the realm of hunters, or is it Gur, the realm of instinct? Much like Akshi is the realm of passions, and Hish is the realm of logic, the elf asked. I think you are baiting and hooking us with this nonsense, aren't you? Zarna said. I could be the bait, the elf replied. Who are you baiting? Argus asked, slightly agitated. Perhaps the Zangor, the elf replied. You Stormcast could be big, shiny hooks upon which the Zangor will bite. And Zarna here could be the strong fisherwoman ready to reel them in. The elf smiled at Zarna. Although still calm, the demeanor of the elf had changed subtly. She seemed to enjoy the challenge. Another shot cracked in the dark. Arid was frowning intensely by now. Or, we are the bait, and you are the Zangor, he spat out wildly, swung his handgun to aim at the elf. Or are we meant to be prey? Zarna said, curling her lips in anger, shouldering her gun. And you are the hook we bid on. Well, Listen to your instincts, girl, the elf said, clearly intent on agitating. You could learn something. Chapter 3. The Fisherman. Argus stood up. A cold light shone behind his face mask. Cerulean fire grew around his hands and the air fizzled with magic. Zarna braced herself as she could feel the hairs on her neck stand. "Are you the bait, elf?" Argus shouted, but his voice was shrill and distorted. The mouth of his faceplate seemed to open. It moved with the words. The mask itself seemed to talk. "Holy Sigmar!" Arid shouted in utter confusion as he swung his handgun toward Argus, but a gout of fire evaporated him before he even pulled the trigger. The fire projecting from Argus's outstretched hand was bright, prismatic, and utterly corrupting. Zarna stood transfixed in place. "Yes, I am the bait," the elf said. Her face finally betrayed her, anger and fear. "And you bit, changeling. You bit and got hooked by my riddles. As did your pitiful acolytes." The thing that was Argus shrieked in frustration. Pale blue arms sprouted from its left armpit. Behind him, the sequitors seemed to change as well. Shimmers passed across them and the air distorted by them as if it was scorching heat. Their faceplates contorted into leering demon masks. Their armor faded instead of revealing chiseled torsos bedecked with profane amulets and eye-like charms. Their weapons shimmered as they reshaped into wicked shards of curving metal. "Then who is the Fisherman?" the changeling shrieked as it hurled prismatic flames at the elf, but she deftly rolled aside. Not far away, a black powder volley roared, followed by bestial shrieks. The Zangor were in full assault now. Who is the Fisherman?" the changeling continued in frustrated rage. His answer came swiftly. From the massive tree sprouted a large wooden claw, and another. A human-like tree giant easily 5 times the height of Zarna stepped out of the bark. It reached into the rocky valley and pulled a glowing sword easily as tall as itself. Its roar rumbled the cracking timber. With a single thrust, it plunged its sword through the changeling, who evaporated in a burst of bright pink and yellow fire. Even then it seemed to shriek, "Hoo! 2 more sword-wielding tree giants stepped out from the tree line and set to butchering both the acolytes and the Zangors with equal fervor. It was then Zarna felt a sharp pain in her side, and all faded. Chapter 4. The Catch. Zarna squinted against the morning light as she awoke. She tasted the tang of blood. She found herself sitting against a hard surface. Everything hurt. Her head rang, her ankles stung. Worst was the pain in her side. Her thoughts were hazy and blurry. "Here, drink this," the elf said, as she pressed a bowl against Zarna's lips. "Gods, what happened?" Zarna groaned as she took a few clumsy sips, her voice feeble. "A Sylvaneth ambush. You were stabbed," the elf said. The veneer of the mysterious Riddler was gone. She sounded resigned. Zarna coughed. "You used us," said Zarna. "Yes, though I had little choice in the matter, I did my best to save as many as I could," said the elf. "How many?" Zarna asked. The elf did not reply. "And what do you mean by no choice in the matter?" Zarna continued. She tried to stand up, but failed as she felt a sharp sting in her ankle. "Sit down," the elf said, though not unkindly. "You are weak, and your ankles need binding." The elf stared silently for a while before she sighed and shook her head. "My soul is bound," she finally relinquished. She lifted her hair to show the right side of her head, which was shaven bald. Above the ear, a large sigil was engraved in her flesh. 2 blood-red antlers. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry," she continued. Zarna looked at the elf. She seemed genuine. "Kurnoth?" Zarna asked. "For my sins," the elf replied, but did not look up. She had been carefully removed Zarna's boots and was binding her ankle. It hurt intensely. "How many have you saved?" Zarna asked again. The elf still didn't reply and kept her eyes transfixed on the ankle. "Just the Zoggin 3 of us," Arid mumbled nearby, followed by a dry cough. Arid sat slacked against a large rock with all the grace of an empty sack. His face cringed in pain as he timidly tried to wave. "No more?" Zarna asked. "You made campfire inside a wildwood and stared down a demon lord. Few do so and live. I expected to die myself," the elf replied. "Well, we didn't, eh?" Arid laughed proudly before his laugh came to a painful cough. Zarna looked around through her squinted eyes. They were sitting a fair distance away from the battlefield. The 3 massive trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, utterly unassuming, save for the corpses strewn around them. "Why help us?" Zarna asked. "You think I am beyond compassion," the elf said. "I trusted my instincts. I think you are worth saving." The elf leaned in close to Zarna and whispered, slightly worried, "And what does your instinct tell you, Zarna?" "I'm not sure about him." Zarna tried to push herself upright when she felt a familiar shape beneath her hand. It was her handgun. To her surprise, she found it had been loaded. Zarna sighed deeply and closed her eyes. The cool morning air was pleasant against her skin. She set the gun on her lap and clicked back the hammer. "I thought I saw you burn to cinders, Arid," Zarna said, as she brought the gun against him. "So tell me, do you like riddles?" And friends, that is A Fisherman's Tale, the number 4 winner in our most recent Gur lore contest. I have to say, this is an incredible story. Like, it's honestly, it's what is it? The Thing set in the mortal realms, where you have a changeling who can shape forms and that kind of stuff. At some point, this retinue of Stormcast was replaced by Tzeentchian cultists who were shapeshifting to look like Stormcast. And I guess the thing that really stands out to me with this piece that I absolutely love is the growing sense, even in such a short story, of how the Stormcaster changed. Like, it starts off with them acting normal, kind of indifferent to the humans, but then it kind of gets more and more agitated. And I guess the coolest scene to me was when the lips of the mask started to move, because the changeling wasn't kind of keeping it all together. And so just that kind of little thing, I was like, oh man, there's something wrong with him. I just absolutely loved it. And yeah, in the ending, it is exactly like The Thing, where it's just the two heroes that we followed the whole story, just laughing like, one of us is the alien. I know it's not me. That kind of a thing. I absolutely adored this story. And I adored it not only because it is like a piece of fiction that I genuinely love. I love the movie The Thing. But also that it really does play up that idea of Gur being this place of predator and prey, hunter and hunted. And I just thought it did a great job of mingling those together. That there is this huge debate between who is predator, who is prey in this moment. Because when you have these 3 forces, meaning what should have been Stormcast, humans, Free Guild, and then a local, the elf, all having this debate about who the predator, the prey is, what they're trying to do, how they're trying to get out into these woods and that kind of stuff. It's one of those things, I just thought it was really well done. In addition, I love the fact that I didn't even catch it until the end when the author said that there was a Sylvaneth ambush, that the actual 3 trees that we're sitting near were a Sylvaneth wildwood that sprouted up. I don't know why, it just took forever to sink in. So I was like, oh, there's 3 trees there. That's weird. I didn't think they were there before. And that's exactly what it is. It was part of a Sylvaneth, massive trap to get rid of these Zangor. And I thought, that is cool. It's the coolest Sylvaneth ambush story ever, even though they're featured very little in it. I want to know more all about this elf. It left me just with a lot of questions and exciting stuff. And so I absolutely loved this story. I hope you did as well. Because these are the kind of stories that I love doing these contests for. Much like on Gilded Steps, I think it was, in the first contest I did, where it's just these little snapshots of these different factions all intermingling, and just everyone is trying to suss each other out and be like, are you here for me? Are you here to kill me? Are you a good guy? Are you a bad guy? And then just having the Tzeentch aspect of changing your form to, basically hide in plain sight is just awesome on top of that, because that just makes that whole dynamic just insane. So I loved this story. Thank you so much for writing in. So again, another big shout out to all of the Gur contest winners. You all did fantastic. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll see you all tomorrow morning for our final contestant winner. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Happy wargaming.